Our speaker today is currently on a, quote, dream come true tour that he has imagined for many years. Imran Ahmad's memoir, The Perfect Gentleman, Muslim Boy Meets the West, is a story of life in a post-9/11 world. In it, he describes the choices he made between his Islamic identity and his desire to embrace the West. He was born in Pakistan, grew up in London, and since 2000 has worked for General Electric. Here's one review of his book. With a unique style and unflinching honesty, The Perfect Gentleman addresses serious issues in an extraordinarily light way, leaving readers both thinking deeply and laughing out loud. Please welcome Imran Ahmad.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And thank you very much to all of you for coming. I really appreciate that you came. You have no idea how much it means to me that you came. Let me explain. The first time I ever did anything like this, my book had just been published. It had only been out for just a few days and already it had nearly sold a copy. And I was asked to give a talk at Borders in Islington, which is in North London. And it was on a Tuesday evening at 7:30. So I showed up at 7 p.m. and I had a very bad feeling from the very beginning because there was no poster or anything up about my talk. But they had laid out 40 chairs. And actually there was a very good sign. There was a woman already sitting there half an hour early, staking out her place. So that was a very good sign. Until she got up and wandered away. And I realized that she was just someone who was looking at a book and had wanted somewhere to sit. So 7:30 came, and there was no one there at all. So it was a very big Borders, and it had a coffee shop and so on. So they got on the loudspeaker and they said, "This evening in Borders, we are privileged to have Imran Ahmad, the author of." And then he read from the book jacket in such a dreary way. He made it sound so boring that even I didn't want to be there. But nonetheless, they were able to drum up an audience, so I began. But it was a horrible experience. The audience were completely miserable. They didn't laugh at any of my jokes. And only one member of the audience sat at the front, and the other one sat right at the back. So that's why I'm very grateful that you came. Thank you very much. And can you hear me okay? Good, good. And can you understand me okay? Okay, good. That's very important because I don't take it for granted that I'm actually understood, even if I think I'm speaking the same language, and I try not to make assumptions. Let me give you an example. So I've actually been working in Malaysia for about a year and a half now, and after I'd been there a few weeks, I needed a haircut. So I went to a barber shop, and it was an elderly Chinese gentleman, and he didn't seem to have much English, but I thought, that doesn't matter. I will use the principle of universal archetypes. So I said to him, "Have you seen a James Bond movie?" He said, yes, James Bond, yes. I said, "Good. I'll have a standard James Bond, please." He said, yes, okay. So I got in the chair, and I was pretty tired, so I sort of settled back, and I closed my eyes, and I drifted off, and before I knew it, he'd shaved off all my hair. I said, "What the hell are you doing? Don't you know who James Bond is?" He said, yes, man with cat. So that's why we must never make assumptions that we're understood. Now, I will tell you this. I made that story up to illustrate a point, but everything else I tell you today is completely true. Everything else is absolutely true. So when I was a kid, I remember wanting to be a writer. I remember thinking about it. I remember walking to school and thinking how cool it would be to have written books that lots of people have read, how cool that would be. But unfortunately, I didn't do anything about it. I actually studied chemistry at university, which I really didn't enjoy. And then I started my corporate career and I went into finance, which I really didn't enjoy. And to be honest, I wasn't any good at chemistry or finance. But it seems we go through life doing what we think we ought to do rather than what we would like to do, because for some reason we believe that we should not do what we would like to do. There are many valid, logical, rational reasons why we should not do what we would like to do. And so we do what we ought to do. And it's taken me decades, actually, to figure out, you know what? I can do what I'd like to do, and I'm doing it now. So when I was a kid, my self-perception of Muslims is that actually we were very boring people because we just prayed all the time, and we didn't drink, and we didn't go to parties. Well, we didn't get invited to the really good parties. We made the Amish look like swingers. And we weren't supposed to have sex unless we got married. But that didn't matter because our food was really good. And in those days, there was no issue of Islam versus the West. Because in those days, the issue was the godless communists. And I was very happy and comfortable to see America working with various Muslim countries, in particular Pakistan, to drive the godless communists out of Afghanistan. And nobody would confuse me with a godless communist. So I was very comfortable in that world because I was on the same side as James Bond and the $6 million man, which seems very cheap now, by the way. And I actually discovered that I had a connection with James Bond when I started to read the actual James Bond novels by Ian Fleming. Ian Fleming's very precise about many things, and he gives a very precise description of James Bond. And it's like this. He had a dark, clean-cut face. He had long black brows, hair black, parted on the left, a longish straight nose, a wide and finely drawn but cruel mouth. Well, my mouth can be cruel if I try. Okay, it does say that there's a 3-inch scar on the right cheek, which I don't have, but there is a dimple on the chin on the right side. So when I read this, in particular, the hair black parted on the left and the longish straight nose, I thought, hang on a minute, Ian Fleming's describing me. That means if I look like James Bond, I'm not that different from James Bond, apart from the vodka, the cigarettes, and the women. And if I'm not that different from James Bond, who is the ultimate establishment figure, that means that I belong. Because when I was growing up, I just wanted to belong. I didn't want to be different. And there was an extent to which I was different, because I was born in Pakistan, and I was a Muslim. I was growing up in a Western Christian or secular society. And so there was an extent to which I was different. But I didn't really want to be different. I just wanted to belong. And I felt that if I was similar to James Bond, then I kind of did belong. Then a couple of unexpected things happened. First of all, the godless communists became capitalists. Now they come to London and they buy our soccer teams. So they're no longer the enemy, that they've joined the West. And I remember Gore Vidal saying in the early 90s, the military-industrial complex cannot stand a vacuum. There has to be someone to be afraid of. There has to be an other. And then something else very unexpected happened. 9/11 happened. And it was just a horrible, gut-wrenching event. But out of the tragedy of that horrible day, out of the dust and rubble of that day, a new other began to emerge. And it was me. And it seemed to me now the world descended into a state of hysteria and demonization, and we were presented with a new model of the world. It was no longer the godless communists versus the West. It was now Islam versus the West. Now, I knew there was no such thing as Islam as a singular entity, just as, in fact, there's no such thing as the West or even America as a singular entity. But we were being presented with this polarized, simplified view of the world, and many of us slid into it very easily with what I call a lazy tribalism. Lazy tribalism is where you just fall into a tribal position where you're different from an other, and you kind of base your identity on that. And lazy tribalism makes us do terrible things. The difference between a civilized person and a barbarian is that a civilized person will only take action against the actual perpetrator of a crime. But a barbarian will take action against anyone that he can associate with the actual guilty party by any attribute. And a very terrible manifestation of this happened just a couple of days after 9/11, when a Sikh gas station owner in Arizona was shot and killed. Now, Sikhs are not Muslims, but they have beards and turbans, so they look like Muslims are supposed to look like. And you can imagine him possibly even trying to reason with his attacker and saying, "But I'm not Muslim." And the attacker saying, "But you look like one." Shakespeare describes this very, very elegantly in Julius Caesar. Now, Caesar was very popular with the people, but he was murdered by some conspirators who included Brutus and Cinna. And the people were very angry because Caesar was very popular, so people went out looking for revenge. And a mob came upon Cinna the poet. Now, it was very clear in the discussion between this mob and Cinna the poet that he was not Cinna the conspirator. That was very clear, but they killed him anyway because he had the same name. And this is what I call lazy tribalism, where we're just willing to take revenge against anyone if we can associate them with the actual guilty party. And Shakespeare has done this described this very succinctly. And we've been doing it for thousands of years, and to a certain extent we all do it, even though we might try not to, but to a certain extent we all do it. So what does it look like, this lazy tribalism, this polarization, demonization, this viewing of the world through the lens of Islam versus the West, which certain parties are driving deliberately? So what do we know about Muslims? Now, these are the facts. These are the facts, and you cannot argue with them. The data is all there, and it's all accurate, it's all authentic. We know that they're terrorists, they're bombers, they put bombs in their shoes and bombs in their underpants, and they look like terrorists. I mean, you can tell just by looking at them that they're terrorists. They have a certain look about them. And they're pirates, and they are religious fanatics, and they learn terrorism from the Quran, and they teach it to their children, and they're just crazy, and they want to take over the world by force. And they love to oppress women. So when they're not actively pursuing terrorism, then their full-time hobby is oppressing women, which they do all the time. So when we put all this together, and you cannot argue with the facts, you cannot argue with the data. When you put it all together, it's absolutely clear. The logical conclusion is that Muslims are terrorists and are fanatics who oppress women and want to destroy the West. You can't argue with the authentic data. So that's how I look like when Fox News represents me. So how might it look the other way? How might America look if represented by Al-Qaeda, for example? Now, imagine that you're a villager in, say, Afghanistan or Iraq or Pakistan, and you've never had any personal interaction with Americans. No human interaction. Maybe the only Americans you've ever dealt with or seen went by in a helicopter gunship or went by at 100 miles an hour in an armored vehicle. And what you saw of them, they looked like Robocops in all this gear. I mean, they look like aliens or Robocops, as I said. And you don't know that inside that armor is just a 19-year-old kid who wants to survive and go to college and marry his girlfriend and have a family. But you don't see that, because what you see is this very intimidating alien. So imagine Al-Qaeda comes along and tells you, listen, let me tell you about America and let me show you the data, and it's all authentic. You can check it for yourself. They are brutal and without compassion. They hate our religion. They are religious fanatics and crazies. They hate our religion. They insult our prophet. They burn our holy book. They have the most appalling morals imaginable. They relish their abomination, their drunkenness, and so on. And they're not even ashamed of it. I mean, they display it brazenly. And they interfere all around the world. I mean, even against their own laws and rules, they interfere. And you can read about it in all of their own newspapers and magazines. And they're killing our brothers and sisters and torturing them in Afghanistan and Iraq and so on. And it's in their own newspapers. They write about it in their own newspapers. I'm not making this up. You can read it for yourself. So when you put all of this together, the data, the picture is very bleak. The conclusion you might reasonably reach is that the West, especially America, hates Islam and wants to oppress and kill all Muslims. And that's a reasonable conclusion based on the data. But could it be that this data, although it's authentic and it is accurate, it's not actually representative? Could it be that, in fact, it's only a fragment of a much bigger picture? Could it be, in fact, that America and Americans does have compassion? Could it be that America is actually trying to help the Afghan people with education and healthcare and to build a functioning society with social justice and so on. Could that be the case? Could it be that America and Americans actually do good work all around the world? I mean, these people who work for the Peace Corps, they certainly don't do it for the money or the oil, and they don't actually get enough publicity, I think. But could this be what America and Americans actually do around the world generally? And could it be that when they interfere, sometimes it's actually the morally correct thing to do? And it may actually come with a very high price in terms of lives and politics and so on, but maybe it's the right thing to do sometimes when they interfere. Maybe we actually wish that America would interfere more around the world, and actually can't because of the uproar that it would cause. And could it be that, in fact, Americans don't all hate Muslims? Could it be that the picture is actually very different and very human? So when you put all of this together, you get a much different picture in which all the horrible stuff I showed you, it's there, it's true, it's authentic, but it's just a fragment of the overall picture. And I put it to you that this is probably a more representative picture of the true situation. And you know this because you are Americans. You know that that blip in the corner does not represent you. You know that because you are Americans. And I know that because I've met literally thousands of Americans. I've even kissed a few. Was that one? Oh, that one was a mistake. So anyway, it could be that the data that's selected doesn't always give a representative view. So how does it look the other way? Remember those Muslims, and we concluded from the data a very bleak picture about them, about us. Well, could it be that this data, although it's authentic and it's accurate and it's true, again, isn't representative and is actually just a fragment of the overall picture? Now, what I'm about to show you about Muslims is actually quite shocking. The truth about Muslims, in my experience, it really hasn't changed that much. It's that they are extremely boring people. They go shopping in malls. I mean, these clearly are Muslim-looking women. They don't look particularly oppressed, even though they're wearing headscarves. They look quite cheerful. They're shopping in malls. They do aerobics. They are soccer fans. They do first aid. They play bagpipes. They buy ice cream for their children. They dress up as superheroes and even as Santa. Now, I'm not entirely convinced by the Santa, but I did take that picture myself. In fact, I took all these pictures myself, except for these. Now, as for these oppressed women, well, oh, hang on. This is a particularly shocking picture. My boss in Malaysia is very brutal. He made us do karaoke. And I thought it was just awful. And I thought, why can't he just take us to a lap dancing club like civilized people? And then these Malaysian policewomen, they don't look oppressed to me. I really wouldn't want to mess with them at all. To be honest, if I was going to be arrested, I'd much rather be in Indonesia, which looks much more friendly. And then all of these Muslim women, they're all Muslim, but they look very different. Astronaut, Baroness and chairman of the Conservative Party in the UK, which would be roughly equivalent to the Republican Party. So the chairman of the essentially Republican Party of the UK is a Muslim woman, a nanotechnologist, a queen, proud American, and a doctor. So Muslim women come in many guises. Could it be that oppression of them isn't necessarily a religious mandate, but is actually a localized phenomena in certain places, caused by poverty, education, oppression, and so on, localized factors? There's an interesting phenomenon going on at the moment. There are free medical clinics actually springing up around the US run by Muslim physicians. It's a way of us meeting our obligations for charity and community service. But the anti-Muslim bloggers are saying that this is actually a sinister plot to convert Americans and take over America by stealth. Well, it seems that really anything you do can be presented in a negative way. The aerobics could be a terrorist training camp. Those soccer fans are actually fanatics, and playing the bagpipes is preparing for war. Anything can be presented in a negative way. So the world has slipped into this polarized state, and too many of us get caught up in it. how did it affect me personally? Well, I didn't get shot at, and I didn't get abused. I'm very grateful, actually, that the world was quite gentle with me after 9/11. How it affected me personally was in my travels to the United States. Now, I lived in London, I worked for General Electric, and I came to America on business all the time. And in fact, I loved coming to America. I'd arrive, and I'd go to Red Lobster, and then I'd go to Target and buy all the good stuff, and everyone was always friendly and cheerful, and I really enjoyed it. But after 9/11, I began to hear stories about Muslims arriving and being interrogated for hours and so on, and I began to be afraid of arriving in America. But nothing actually happened to me for over a year after 9/11. It wasn't until October 2002, so well over a year after 9/11, and it was my 77th arrival into the United States, 77th, and I came into Atlanta, and for the very first time ever, I was sent to secondary. So what is secondary? Well, it's another room they have where they have these chairs and these people sitting there, huddled masses, looking frightened and afraid. And I'd been sent there because they had all this new equipment and the process for people like me, whatever that was. They had these new digital cameras and retina scanners and fingerprint scanners and so on. And I was assigned a blonde woman, a Homeland Security officer, who was supposed to take me through the process. But she'd never used the equipment before, so somebody else came to show her how to use it. And then she just wandered off and left him to it, which was unfortunate, because I thought she was rather attractive. Although it may have been the uniform, the gun, and the handcuffs. So anyway, he takes me through the process. He takes my digital photo, scans my retina, takes my fingerprints, scans them, then he asks me all these questions. How tall are you? Where were your parents born? What did you study at university? Which, as I told you, was chemistry. Fortunately, it wasn't nuclear physics. And this process actually took hours, and by the time I was let out of there, the baggage hall of Atlanta is enormous, and it was deserted, and my suitcase was just there, off the belt. It was just there, but I could see it from half a mile away. And I went to get it, and I felt very sad at the state of the world. I felt personally upset. My ego was severely damaged, actually. I didn't have a James Bond self-image anymore. Anyway, this happened to me every time I came into the United States for the rest of the Cheney administration. Every time I arrived, I was sent, I would end up being sent to secondary, and it was always the same old questions. How tall are you? Well, I haven't grown any since the last time. Where were your parents born? Well, I don't think that's changed, but I haven't asked them recently. Now, what did you study at university and so on? There was one question they would always ask me, and I just couldn't bear to tell the truth. I just couldn't bear to tell the truth, so I would always discount the answer. They would ask me how much I weighed, and I would always take off 20%. And I know what you're thinking, he does need to lose a bit of weight. It's true, I do need to lose a bit of weight, but actually, there is a remedy. I read recently that sex is the best exercise, because it works all the muscles, and it burns 300 calories an hour. I just have to work out how many calories in 3 minutes. So anyway, this happened every time I came in. And I remember the very last time that I came into the US under the previous administration. I was going to Richmond, Virginia, and I was coming in via Atlanta. I always came in via Atlanta for two good reasons. One was you can't beat the Delta miles. And the other was, I got the feeling that the Homeland Security people in Atlanta, they kind of got to know me. So they knew it was me, so it would be okay, it would just be a formality. So I went up to the first desk, and it was a young African-American woman there, and she scanned my passport. And she reads the screen, and she says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I have to send you to secondary." I said, "Oh, that's okay, don't worry, it happens all the time." She said, "Get out of here." I said, "No, it's true, it happens all the time." And she said, "Get out of here." And she wasn't meaning to me to literally get out of here. She was expressing her surprise. She was expressing her surprise that the system was overriding her own discretion, because normally it's the officer's discretion. They make a decision about whether to send you to secondary or not. But in this case, the system was telling her she had to send me to secondary, and that's what was surprising her. Because look, let's be honest. We know what she was thinking. She was thinking, he looks harmless and cute. So I went to secondary. I knew where it was, and I was assigned this very pleasant man. He was a 60-year-old, I think, Hawaiian gentleman, and he looked just like Chin Ho from Hawaii Five-0. And he was ever so nice, and he took me through the process. I've got the same old things, the photographing and the scanning and the fingerprints and all the same old questions. And by the time I got out of there, I ran to the gate. I had a 4-hour layover, and I ran to the gate, and I just made it. They were just closing the gate. I was the last one on the airplane, and I just made it. And I thought, wow, even with a 4-hour layover, I cannot have a stress-free arrival. I cannot be sure if I'm going to make it or not. And all I wanted was to have a stress-free arrival. Now, I don't know if it's a coincidence or not. I have no idea. But the very first time that I entered the US under the new administration, the Obama administration, and ever since then, that hasn't happened anymore. And I don't know if the two are related. I do know that I came into Chicago in March of 2009. There was a young Hispanic woman at the desk, and she asked me the purpose of my visit to the United States, and I said I was doing a speaking tour. And she asked me who I was, so I put my book on the counter, and she looks at it and she said, it actually wasn't this one, it was the British one, earlier one, but she said, oh, cute picture. And then she read my bio, and then she stamped my passport and said, welcome to the United States. And this has happened every time, actually. I've come in, they always, when they ask me, what's the purpose of your visit? What's your occupation and what's the purpose of your visit? I just say, I'm a writer, and I put my book on the counter. They look at it, they remark on the cover photo, and then they read the bio. And then they say, welcome to the United States. Come. So the moral of the story is this. If you are a terrorist and you want to get in, just publish a book. So that was my personal experience of the post-9/11 world, which, to be honest, is really it's a small price to pay for what happened. It's not that terrible. And to be absolutely honest, every Homeland Security officer and INS officer I ever dealt with was extremely nice to me. They were always very nice, they were polite, they were even, we laughed and we shared a few jokes, whatever, that they took me through the process. So I knew that I could write a book that performed what I call rehumanization of Islam and the West to each other. Because I had grown up in both worlds. I was born in Pakistan. I grew up in London. I went to university in Scotland, and then I worked all around Europe, and I spent 5 years living in the United States. I lived in Minnesota for 5 years, which is as far away from here as can be as possible in every sense of the word. And I knew there was no such thing as Islam as a unified entity. I knew there was no such thing as the West or even America as a singular entity. And I didn't see that the world had to be in this model of Islam versus the West, because I had lived my life in both worlds. And it wasn't an issue. So I knew I could write a book that performed basic rehumanization. The trouble is I didn't do anything about it, because I'm very lazy. And then I read a book on something called creative visualization. Who's heard of creative visualization? Okay, a few people. Do you know in California they all put their hands up, except in San Diego. So in creative visualization, apparently what you do is you visualize what you want to achieve, and you breathe and you meditate on it, and you can make it happen. So I tried it. I followed the instructions in the book. I'm a successful published author. I've written a best-selling book. You know, I really tried it. I followed the instructions to the letter. I really gave it my best shot, but the book just wouldn't manifest. I just couldn't get it to appear. So in the end, I thought I might as well just write the book myself. It'd probably be quicker. And then I read a book called The Alchemist. Who's heard of The Alchemist? Yes, got a few more people. And it says in The Alchemist that the moment you start to follow your life's work, as it were, to do your life's work, the universe conspires with you to make it happen. And after I'd read The Alchemist, within about half an hour, I was thinking, why don't I just write that book I've been meaning to write? Well, the reason I haven't started to write that book is, you know what a huge burden of work it is to write a whole book. I mean, you can imagine writing a whole book, how much work that must be, how long it will take, and what an arduous journey that would be. And I just didn't want to embark on this arduous journey of writing a whole book. I wanted the result. Yeah, sure, I wanted the book, but I didn't want to go on the journey, that long, arduous journey of writing the book. But after reading The Alchemist, I thought, you know what, why don't I just start? So I opened my laptop computer, and I opened a Word document, and I just started to write. And I stopped thinking about it. I wasn't thinking anymore. I was just writing, just doing the writing instead. And I wrote for about half an hour. And then I read what I'd written, and I thought, that's not bad. And I quite enjoyed that, so I carried on writing. Now, it was a Christmas holiday, so I wrote all through the holiday, all the way to New Year. I went back to work at General Electric, but I carried on writing. I would come into the office at 7 in the morning and write till about 8:30 when people came in. And I would write all evening long, and I'd write all weekend. And I was no longer thinking about it. I was just writing, not thinking, just writing. It was just coming out. And by the middle of February, which was about 7 weeks, I had an actual book with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now, it wasn't the final version, because if you're a writer, you know you're always polishing and adding and tweaking and whatever. But the initial book with a beginning, a middle, and an end, I had done in 7 weeks, and it had just come out. So let me read you some of it. So as I said, I was born in Karachi, in Pakistan, and this is from the age of 1, 1964. I came second in the Karachi Bonnie Baby contest. I was wearing a black suit, white shirt, and dark tie. Smartly dressed, suave and handsome, I looked like James Bond, although I was too young to have seen either of his movies. I was also somewhat unsteady on my feet. And that black and white shot there is an authentic shot. And I actually I can't walk, and I really can't stand. I've just been perched there, balanced there for a moment while they take the photo before I fall over. First prize went to the child of the organizer. The judges were her friends. This is absolutely typical of third world banana republic unfairness. In the West, the organizer's child would not be allowed to enter the contest. I was denied the title of Karachi's bonniest baby by blatant nepotism. I began my lifelong struggle against corruption and injustice. So we moved to England, and I started school. We moved to London, and I started school. This is from the age of 5, 1967. Every day we have assembly. Every day I hear a story about Jesus, who lived a long time ago. Jesus was a very good man and told everyone to be nice to people. That seems fair to me. One day, we hear the story of the prodigal son. I'm sitting on the floor with the other children listening to this. We are told that the prodigal son left his father's house to go to a faraway land because he thought that he could find a better life. Instead, he fell upon hard times, had to work as a swineherd, and was reduced to eating the same food as the pigs. I try to imagine what this must be like, but there's one thing that I don't understand. If he was herding pigs, why didn't he just eat the food from the pigs? This, I know, is spam, which we are fed at school. I know that eggs come from chickens and milk comes from cows, so I have logically deduced that slices of spam emerge from live pigs in the same way. This is from the age of 6, 1968. One day at school lunch, I noticed that my classmate, Stephen McNamara, has an interesting way of eating spam. He cuts the slice into precise little squares. I wish that I had done the same. I look forward to the next time that we eat spam. Due to the unhealthy nature and repetition of school meals, I do not have long to wait. When I next eat spam, I remember to cut it into little squares, which is fun. I tell my parents about it in the evening. They confer together, then issue a commandment. We don't eat pork. I am disappointed, but I obey them. From then on, I don't eat pork. I don't know why, but I don't do it. This is from the age of 9, 1969. Sorry, the age of 7, 1969. In the playground, Patricia asked me, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I know the answer. I've thought about it a lot. I'd like to have my own television program. What, you mean like the Imran Ahmad show? No, I mean like, but my voice trails off. I can't explain this. It will sound ridiculous. What I really want is to be an actor who plays a character like Simon Templar in The Saint, a brave hero who helps good people and punches bad people and drives a sports car called a Volvo. But I know that this is a wild, impossible dream for 2 reasons. First, no one can imagine a television program with a Pakistani man as the hero. That will never happen. Second, as a television hero, I would probably have to kiss women on the lips. And Pakistanis don't do that. I cringe with embarrassment to what my parents would think if they saw me on the television kissing women like the saint does. So I read that passage out at the Sydney Writers' Festival, and afterwards when we had questions, a woman put up her hand to ask a question. She said, "So why don't Pakistanis kiss on the lips?" I said, "Madam, I assure you that we do. That's why there's so many of us. Just not in public. There are no public displays of romantic affection." Now, she hadn't got that. She thought this was some other taboo, some forbidden thing like alcohol that Muslims don't do, which makes life really boring. So she hadn't got that. But the other interesting thing about that passage is I knew when I was 7 that I wanted to be an actor. But this was simply not an option for me. It wasn't open to me at all. Because if you are a child of the Indian subcontinent, there's only one job you can tell your parents you want to be that will make them really happy, which is a doctor. If you're not so bright, you can be a lawyer, an engineer, or an accountant. But actor is not even on the list of recognized occupations. The tragedy is this. If I had indeed followed my dream, if I'd been in every school play that I could, and then I'd gone to drama school and been in every production possible, and then I just worked as a waiter while getting bit parts in awful soap operas, I'd be living in Hollywood today, because they are crying out for people like me to play terrorists. This is from the age of 8, 1970. My friend Adam Smith invites me to his house after school for tea. Their house is duplex and has a big backyard, and his mother is quite posh. She calls us inside to eat and puts a plate of sausages and beans in front of each of us. "Are these pork sausages?" I ask in a serious, businesslike manner. When Adam's mother confirms that they are, I respond automatically and somewhat abruptly, in a voice indicating strong concern. "I don't eat pork." Adam's mother is the perfect hostess. "Oh, of course you don't. How silly of me. I'll do you some fried eggs instead." She pulls the plate away immediately. "Why doesn't he eat pork, Mum?" queries Adam. "Oh, it's religion, dear," responds Adam's mother in a distracted way as she focuses on the frying of eggs. "Oh, so that's why I don't eat pork. It's because of my religion." This is from the age of 9, 1971. Every Saturday, I watch an amazing television program called UFO. It is set in the distant future, the 1980s. Aliens keep attacking Earth, and a secret organization called Shadow is set up to defend us. Shadow has a hidden underground headquarters, a moon base, fleets of spacecraft, aircraft, submarines, and armored vehicles, and cool cars that have doors that swing open upward. What I really like is that lots of colored people work for Shadow. The chief space pilot is a black man, and a young woman who looks Pakistani works at the headquarters. She never says much, but she wears a big medallion and a very tight uniform. It's the same in Star Trek. It means that one day in the future, colored people won't be second class. We'll just be normal. And this is from the age of 13. Oh yeah, as I grew older, my concerns changed somewhat. The focus of my worries changed a lot, typical for a teenage boy. So this is age 13, 1975. The problem of pajamas troubles me greatly. Pajamas always have a generous hole at the front to make it easy for you to get the equipment out to pee. The question is, what do you do during you-know-what? When I see on television people who've apparently just had sex, the man always has pajama bottoms on. For example, in the film Goldfinger, James Bond is wearing pajama bottoms. The woman he stole away from Mr. Goldfinger is wearing the pajama top. Do you use the hole to put the equipment through, or do you take the pajamas off completely and then put them back on again immediately afterwards? I will need to know this before my wedding night. And this is from the age of 16, 1978. We are all loitering in our classroom one lunchtime. Barry Sutton suddenly asked me a question out of the blue. "Hey, Imran, are your parents going to arrange your marriage?" He is serious and genuinely interested. Everyone's attention is suddenly upon me. They are all interested too. Arranged marriage is something that always happens. in any television program in which Indian or Pakistani characters appear? Does it apply to Imran? This is the unspeakable demon that has lurked in my mind for years. It has never been discussed overtly at home, but there has always been an implicit assumption that this will be the case. Any other process will cause a huge conflagration in my family. I imagine being asked as a grown-up, "Where did you meet your wife?" and having to answer, "At our wedding." I can't bear to think about it. I want to be like James Bond or Simon Templar. They don't have arranged marriages. No, of course not, I tell the class with forced joviality. Anyway, those are just some samples from this book, which proceeds in that vein for about 25 years and then has some epilogues which bring it up to the present day. And although it's a memoir, and it's all true, the memoir is actually a vehicle for many quite serious discussions actually about philosophy, religion, sociology, politics, foreign affairs, and so on. But they're all woven into the narrative in a way that they stay quite light. And what people have said is it's a very funny book, but it's also very serious, but it never gets very heavy. So I'd written this book, and I sent it to the manuscript to friends of mine in America, in Australia, and in the UK, and they all wrote back and said it was great, which is what friends are for. So the question was how to get published. Now, the writing of the book, I have to tell you, the writing of the book actually was incredibly easy. It was such a joyful process. I totally enjoyed it, and I never was really aware. Once I started the journey, I wasn't really thinking about the destination of a finished book and how far away that was. I was just immersed in the process, the journey of writing the book, and it was a joyful process. I enjoyed it so much, and before I knew it, I had a whole book. So the writing of the book was actually wonderful and joyful. The getting it published was impossible. It's a very long story, a very long process, and it was virtually impossible because nobody was interested in a book about the ordinariness of being Muslim. That was my problem. There was no interest in a book just about being ordinary and Muslim and not getting all fanatical and so on. In the end, actually, I ended up self-publishing it, and only when I self-published it, then did somebody influential read it, and they sent it to a literary agent, and the literary agent actually took me on as a client, so that's how I got a literary agent in the end. So we shut down the self-published book because he was very clear, you must get a proper publisher. So the self-published book, all that did was get me a literary agent. And the agent said, "Oh, this book was so funny and engaging and insightful and topical, whatever." And he said it would sell so easily. Imran, I'm going to sell this so easily. And I'm sending it to the top 10 UK publishers, Penguin, Random House, all the rest. And so during that time that it had gone out to the top 10 UK publishers, and I was imagining what would happen. I was still taking the I was still working at General Electric, obviously. I was still taking the 7:04 a.m. train from my local station to London Waterloo. And I was looking at the grey-suited, somber-faced fellow commuters who were probably accountants like me, because the lawyers would be in first class. And I was thinking, well, this summer they're going to be reading my book and laughing. And I imagined what would happen, because I imagined being on a television program on BBC One called The Heaven and Earth Show. And I imagined being on this very prestigious program on BBC Radio 4 called Midweek. And I know that when you sign a book deal, you always get an advance with lots of zeros. And I imagined what I would do with all those zeros. And I imagined that I would buy a convertible car, but not a soft top, a hard top, because I don't like soft tops, I like hard tops. And one where you push a button and the hard top folds itself into the trunk. And it would have to have a back seat as well, because you can't not have a back seat, because you're always carrying extra stuff and your friends and so on. So I'd have this silver convertible car with a hard top, which when I pushed the button would fold itself into the trunk, and it would have a back seat, and it would have an integrated satellite navigation system, and it would be silver grey in color. Anyway, the top 10 UK publishers, they all turned it down. And I went to see my agent. I said, what the hell's going on? You said that it would sell so easy. It was funny, engaging, insightful, and topical, and so on. And he said, Imran, this is what they said. They said it wasn't miserable enough. It's not miserable enough. He wasn't sexually abused as a child. There's no terrorism angle. He didn't become a terrorist, not even an Islamist. Too much discussion about religion as it affects his thought processes, and there's no angle. He said they're actually looking for a book by someone who became, well, preferably a terrorist, but if not a terrorist, at least an Islamist. is that not you? I said, no, that's not me. So this is the problem, and actually this is the inherent problem. If you have no personal interaction with, for example, Muslims, and if the only data you get comes through the system filters the data that you get, and the system filters what you see. So the concept of Muslims as ordinary, unless you have personal interaction, the concept of Muslims as ordinary is alien to you because you only get this kind of data. And that's the inherent problem. That's actually what I was trying to deal with. Anyway, in the end, he actually sent it to some smaller publishers, less commercial, and we did get some offers then, and we signed a deal, and I went with the editor who wrote, "Seldom have I enjoyed a manuscript so much," and she didn't ask me for more sex or violence, which was good because I had no more to give. And we signed a deal, and I did receive an advance. I can't tell you how much it was because that's private, but I will tell you that I've seen used mountain bikes that cost more money. Anyway, a year later, the book was published, and I actually was on the Heaven and Earth show and BBC Radio 4 midweek that very week. And the book got a lot of acclaim, and the most amazing things began to happen. So people said that it was a very politically important book. So I decided to send a copy to every single member of Parliament, of whom there are 646. Now, if you consider that it takes 4 minutes to inscribe and sign a book, to fold a covering letter, to put that in the book, close the book, put that in an envelope, seal the envelope, and put that on a pile, 4 minutes times 646 equals 42 hours. That does not include the time that you spend surfing the internet and staring out the window. That's extra. So it's 42 hours. And this broke, I always had this theory when I was a kid. Those of you still in college, listen carefully. I always had this theory when I was in college, whatever, that anything you needed to do, you could just do it by working through the night before. But when I did the math on this, that wasn't going to work. So I spent 3 weekends on this, 3 solid weekends, and I went through a list of the MPs alphabetically, and obviously began at the beginning. The first weekend, A, B, and so on. The second weekend, I was in the middle. And the third weekend, I was near the end. I got to W. And I came upon a particular MP, her name, and when I saw that name, I thought, I can't stand that woman. For I'd seen her on the television a lot. And her name was Widdecombe MP. And she was always presented, she was a very conservative Christian, and she was always presented as very miserable. So it wasn't a sort of peace and love, joy kind of Christian, but a kind of, you are doing something wrong, you should feel guilty kind of Christian. And I thought, oh, she's always miserable. So if she's a very conservative Christian, that means that she's a miserable old dragon. And if she's a miserable old dragon, she's never going to read a book with A Muslim Boy Meets the West in the subtitle. Oh, she's never going to read my book. I'm wasting my time and my money sending that woman my book. Oh, money, yes, because you know what? Just because you wrote the book, you don't get it for free. You do have to pay the publisher for the book, not full retail. Okay, you get a discount, but you do have to pay for the books. And I thought, I'm wasting my time and my money sending that miserable woman my book. And I thought, I know what I can do. I'll send it to 645 MPs, but I'll say that I send it to 646 and nobody will ever know. But in the end, I just thought, oh, to hell with it, and I inscribed it. Dear Anne, blah, 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 best wishes. And never have best wishes been conveyed so sullenly and insincerely as I conveyed them then. And I folded the letter and put it in the book and put it in the envelope and put it on the pile and to hell with it. So I finished the 646 books. And I loaded the 646 packages into my car, and I drove to the House of Commons. Now, the policeman at the gate, he wasn't that happy to see a Middle Eastern-looking man driving up in a black car with 646 letter bomb-sized packages, each one addressed to a different member of Parliament. It did not make his day, but nonetheless, he called somebody out, and they helped me take the books out of the car. And they actually have an airport-style security scanner with a belt. So we loaded the books onto the belt, and they went through the scanner, and that was that. So from the very next day, and for several weeks, I received literally hundreds of letters from members of Parliament, all thanking me for the book. Some of them even saying that they'd read it and really liked it. In fact, I even got a letter from David Cameron, the leader of the opposition, and he wrote this wonderful letter saying that he'd read the book and he really enjoyed it. And then he hand-wrote on the letter that I could write speeches for him. But now that he's Prime Minister, he doesn't answer my calls, he doesn't return my emails, he doesn't respond to anything. But of course, I didn't get anything from Anne Widdecombe MP, but of course, what do you expect from that miserable woman? So the most amazing things began to happen. Now, I will tell you, I never did get that convertible car, and actually it did not matter in the end, because that was a red herring, that was a false goal. The joy has been in the journey and the experiences I've had, and the experiences have been so priceless that I don't care about convertible cars anymore. I'm just enjoying this incredible journey. So I sent a copy to the director of the Edinburgh International Book Festival, Catherine Lockerbie, and she read it, and she invited me to her festival in Edinburgh, a very prestigious festival. So they invited me to Edinburgh, and they gave me a badge that said I was a writer. And it let me, they had this big writer's tent, they call it a yurt, writer's yurt, with carpets and sofas and food and drink, and there were all these famous writers in there. And they thought I was a writer as well. And my event went fantastically, and people laughed, and I had the most wonderful time, and I thought, wow, I'm finally doing what I always wanted to do. Now, the final evening I was there, it was pouring with rain. It was dark and pouring with rain, and there was nobody in the writer's yurt except myself and this beautiful woman who was sitting there writing in her personal organizer. So I thought, well, it's worth a shot, isn't it? So I said to her, what terrible weather we're having. And she agreed we were having terrible weather. And then I said to her, so are you a writer as well? And she said in a very tired voice, no, I'm Wendy Weir, I'm the director of the Sydney Writers' Festival. I immediately gave her a pitch on what a great book I'd written, which is why she was feeling so tired, because every writer was doing this. But nonetheless, she gave me her business card, and I airmailed a copy down to her in Australia. I didn't hear from her for 7 months. And then one Monday morning, I came into the office, and there was an email from her, and it said, Dear Imran, I finally found the time to read Unimagined this weekend, and I would like to invite you to the Sydney Writers' Festival. So I ended up going to Sydney, and they gave me a badge that said I was a writer. And it let me into the writers' area, and I met all these famous writers. They thought I was a writer as well. I had the most fantastic time, and people laughed at my event. I got an Australian publisher, I had the most fantastic time, and I thought, wow, this is the best week of my life. So there was a beautiful woman standing there. So I thought, well, it's worth a shot. So I started to talk to her, and she said her name was Janet, and she was the director of the Ubud Writers' Festival in Bali. So I gave Janet a copy of my book, and when I returned to London, 2 days later, she emailed me, having read it, and she invited me to her festival in Bali. So I ended up going to Bali, Ubud in Bali, and they gave me a badge that said I was a writer, and they put me in the Four Seasons Hotel with John Berendt and others, and I had the most amazing time, and my event went fantastically. People laughed, and it was just wonderful. I got an Indonesian publisher, and I had the most wonderful time. I thought, wow, these are the best 8 days of my life. So this vivacious woman came up to me and said her name was Jenny, and she was the director of the Byron Bay Writers' Festival in Australia. Byron Bay is the easternmost point of Australia. So she invited me to Byron Bay, and Catherine from Perth invited me to the Perth Writers' Festival. So I ended up going to Perth, and they gave me a badge, said I was a writer, and let me into the writers' area. I had the most wonderful and amazing time. And I ended up going to Byron Bay, where I had the most wonderful and amazing time, and my book was a #1 bestseller. It was a #1 bestseller at the Byron Bay Writers' Festival. And Jenny from Byron Bay met Isabel from Dubai in Melbourne and told her about me, and Isabel from Dubai invited me to the Emirates Airline Festival of Literature in Dubai. And for the first time, I got to fly business class, because it was Emirates Airlines, and they flew us all business class. And I had the most amazing time. It was fantastic. So the experiences I've had since writing the book have been absolutely priceless. And that's what I say. The joy is in the journey. The joy is in the journey. Don't worry about some red herring goal of a car or something. The joy is in the journey, and the journey is still carrying on. The journey has just been incredible. Anyway, I got in the habit of Googling myself every night. And sometimes in the morning, but I don't like to be late for work. And the most amazing things began to happen. I Googled myself one day and found Unimagined listed in The Guardian in the best books of the year. Another time I Googled myself and found it listed in the Sydney Morning Herald in the pick of the literary crop for that year. Another time I Googled myself and found this image. It's a picture of Julia Gillard, the Australian Prime Minister, in her office. And the article actually was about the things she keeps in her office. And you can see there are some personal ornaments and photos on the right. There's some law books on the top shelf there. And there's a bunch of personal books on the next shelf down on the left. And although the resolution isn't very good, it's okay, because the article actually went through what the books were on her shelf, the Age newspaper, and it listed the books. And the very first one it mentioned was my book, Unimagined. So that was just extraordinary. But the biggest surprise of all came when I Googled myself one day and found Unimagined listed in the Independent newspaper in the best books of the year. thanks to its selection by one of the judges, who wrote that it was my favorite book of the year. One, Anne Widdecombe, MP. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I was so ashamed. I was so ashamed at how I had completely misjudged that decent, kind, warm-hearted woman. You see, I'd seen her on the television, and she was presented as being miserable. She was presented as this miserable old dragon, and I just bought that completely. Now, I didn't know her personally. I'd never met her. But I accepted what the television told me, and I just bought in that she was miserable. And I programmed myself with a very negative reaction to her, negative attitude to her, and I'd never even met her. I didn't know her personally, but I allowed myself to think negative thoughts about her, to have a negative opinion about her without ever having met her or anything, just based on what the television presented to me. So I wrote her a thank you letter. I didn't tell her any of the stuff I told you. And now I realize what a hypocrite this made me. This made me a complete hypocrite, because here am I saying to people, listen, don't judge Muslims by what you see on the television, because that's not fair, that's not representative. But I had done exactly the same thing to Anne Widdecombe. I had seen her presented in a negative way, I'd accepted that as absolutely true without knowing her personally, and I had basically made a judgment and assumptions about her, and I was completely wrong. So now I try to do what her boss would advise, not David Cameron, but her big boss. I honestly try and live my life along the principle of judge not, lest ye be judged. And that's really what I try and do. And we all should try and do that. It's so easy. I mean, we all do it, and it's so easy, even when we think, we're spiritually advanced and so on, but we just do it so easily when our guard is down. So that's what I try and do. Judge not, lest you be judged. And that is essentially the end of my story. Thank you. So just one additional segment, very quickly. So it took me from UK publication to US publication. It took me another 5 years. It took me 5 years to get a US publisher because of this issue of no angle, the ordinariness of being Muslim and so on. But finally, I found a wonderful publisher in New York with Hachette, and the book was published in April. They just changed the title. For some reason, they didn't like Unimagined. They said it wouldn't work with an American audience for whatever reason. Anyway, so they changed the title to The Perfect Gentleman, and I'm doing this 50-city speaking tour of the United States, which I'm currently engaged in. You obviously can't read that there, but it's all on the website, perfectgent.com. And if you have enjoyed today, please take a look at the website. Please reach out to your contacts, your family and friends around the US, and let them know that they might enjoy my talk. Because you know what? To this day, I'm terrified that I'll turn up somewhere and there'll be nobody there. So please help out in that case. And the book is available for sale here. But even if you don't buy the book, please do take one of my business cards, which has got the website on it. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
My name is Kate Covey. I'm a student here at the Clinton School, and I enjoyed your description of the book, that it was to rehumanize Islam to the West and the West to Islam. And I'm curious about how you would do a talk about your book in an audience of Muslims, because you told a lot of sexual jokes with us, and I think you were trying to relate to the West, but I'm curious just how you would present it differently to an audience of Muslims. Thank you.
I had that exact same problem when I went to Dubai, to the Emirates Airlines Festival, and I thought about it a lot. I thought, shall I tell the same jokes or not? And in the end, I decided that I would. And the audience was very mixed. The room was full, and there were a lot of Europeans or Americans there. There were a lot of Arabs, and there were actually women who had their faces veiled. And so I did the joke about sex burns 300 calories an hour. I just have to figure out how many calories in 3 minutes. And the audience all laughed except for the Arabs, right? And I thought, oh. And then like 5 seconds later, they all laughed as well. And I remembered, oh, they have to wait for the translation. So it was okay. I think that some things are, the jokes are not vulgar. They're just sort of kind of the concerns that we have, and all of us, 90%, we have a 90% common human experience. We have the same concerns and issues wherever, so it shouldn't be that I should have to change the content if I'm trying to rehumanize. The reality is that people have written to me and said that whatever their background, their ethnicity, religion, and so on, that they could relate to so many of the experiences in the book. So I shouldn't try and filter what I think will be acceptable, because that's me judging somebody else in advance, isn't it?
Well, thank you so much for joining us here in Arkansas, and good luck on the rest of your tour, and thank you all for coming out.